Welcome to FO Live, our signature panel discussion that brings together perspectives from around the world. This series is brought to you by Fair Observer and the United Service Institution of India. Fair Observer is an independent, non-profit media organization that has published more than 2,500 voices from over 90 countries. Anyone can publish with us, but everyone goes through the same editorial process. So we combine diversity and quality in a way no one else does. Follow us on social media, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and certainly sign up for our free newsletter. Of course, do consider publishing with us. The United Service Institution is of 1870 vintage, started by or founded by Colonel Charles MacGregor, later Major General Charles MacGregor. It seeks to further interest and knowledge in the art, science, and literature of the defense services. It is by far the top defense think tank in India. It is an honor to have them as a partner. Without further ado, I leave you in the capable hands of the erudite and eminent Pablo Pardo. Take it from here, Pablo. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Atul. My name is Pablo Pardo. I'm the US correspondent for El Mundo, Spain's largest daily newspaper. And I've been living in the United States for 20 years. I've been following the Afghan situation for more than 35, basically, out of personal interest. So today, to me, it's an incredible honor to moderate this panel with three outstanding speakers. And I think that something very important in this panel is that the three of them are from the region. It's not only that the three of them have a tremendous international experience, different capacities, but the three of them are specifically from Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India. And I think this is very important. Also, it fits very well into the Fair Observer spirit, because in the last 1 or 2 months, we've seen tons of panels, tons of events in the US, in Europe, about what's going on in Afghanistan. And usually the only people who speak there are American or European experts, and oftentimes military personnel. So we have three outstanding speakers, as I mentioned. One of them is Tavish Forugh. He's the former chief of staff of the Independent Election Commission of Afghanistan. And it's Major General B.K. Sharma, who is the director of the United Service Institution of India. The third one is Mr. Riaz Mohammed, former Foreign Secretary of Afghanistan. Like I said, all of them have a lot of influence in, a lot of experience, in the region. So my first question could be for Mr. Forugh. What are the implications of the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan for the country, but also for the region and also for the world at large, since everybody is talking about that? And well, Afghanistan has a considerable influence in what happens in the world, even if the rest of the world tends to forget it too often.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be with the panelists. I think in terms of implications of the Taliban's takeover of Afghanistan, one should look at not just the short-term, but the long-term implications. And of course, it's not just within Afghanistan, but beyond Afghanistan. It includes the region, and it also impacts the global sort of politics, security, and whatever that's associated with the polity and society of Afghanistan. I think in terms of Afghanistan, it means the resurgence and the re-emergence of the Taliban as a dominant force in Afghanistan, controlling the territory, forming a government which is not recognized by the international community, facing various forms of crisis, including an economic recession, humanitarian crisis, a crisis of legitimacy, and fourth is something that worries the regional actors, which is the reorganization of terrorist, jihadist, internationalist, Islamist movements that see the Taliban victory as a sort of North Star and encouraging that message of encouragement for the rest of the jihadist forces, that what happened in Afghanistan could happen anywhere else. I mean, the other point is that there has been this mantra for a while in the press about Afghanistan, that what happens in Kabul does not stays in Kabul. It means that the Taliban takeover means various things to various partners and players in the region. For instance, for the immediate neighborhood, it means that the Taliban will have tough time dealing in terms of balancing that relationship with Pakistan, with India, with Iran, with Russia, with China, but also with the broader world, how the Taliban will deal with the international demands, with the issues of human rights, with the issues of women's rights, and also the sort and the form of polity that needs to be in place in Afghanistan. I think at the immediate terms, it means the chaos and the disorder are going to continue. In the long term, it means how, and it requires how the world will engage with Afghanistan and how they will respond to the crisis that's unfolding in Afghanistan, including a crisis of humanitarian crisis, and at the same time, economic recession, and the crisis of legitimacy and the vacuum that is created in Afghanistan.
I have one follow-up question. Based on your knowledge of Afghanistan, to what extent the Taliban are a homogeneous, unified force? There are tons of rumors about infighting among the Taliban, but obviously there's no way to know if this is true or not. And also Afghanistan is a very divided, let's say, society. What do you think about that?
First of all, in terms of in the fighting stage, all guerrilla forces, all insurgent groups are unified. Of course, when it comes to governance, it shows the real nature and the real sort of cohesion of any political force that makes that transition from the pure military form of challenging an order into becoming the position and becoming the government. So Taliban so far has remained a cohesive force, but of course, when it comes to governance, when it comes to dealing with various ethnicities, diverse political views, and political groups inside Afghanistan, that is the real challenge to be aware of. Of course, in terms of the public support, in terms of the legitimacy that the Taliban, the crisis of legitimacy that the Taliban are facing, it's quite obvious that the Taliban have a very thin base of support among the rural Pashtun communities of Afghanistan. The claims of Taliban being diversified and having received support from various ethnic groups is not empirically correct, because the large communities of anti-Taliban base is still dissatisfied with the way the Taliban are dealing. They see the Taliban as an intolerant, puritanical, extremist Islamist group that are pursuing a totalitarian regime in terms of politics, and of course in terms of ideological stances. The narrative and the sort of reading of the Taliban from Islam is very much in opposition to the rest of the communities, the way the rest of Afghanistan is reading and perceiving Islam. And in terms of cultural diversity, Taliban are not representing even the cultural diversities of the Pashtun communities, let alone the rest of Afghanistan. So it is a very challenging social, political situation for the Taliban to to reflect Afghanistan. Afghanistan is too big for the Taliban. It's too diverse. So many other initiatives and sort of forces tried to impose themselves on Afghanistan, but unfortunately it failed. And it's a very challenging time, not just for the people of Afghanistan, but of course for the Taliban that are now in control of Afghanistan.
One final question is kind of a bit complex, but if you could answer it in a short manner, it would be great. Let's say, I mean, it seems like the Taliban have won the war. The opposition has been militarily defeated. The Panjshir Valley has been partially occupied. Many of the political figures that oppose the Taliban, Dostum, Atta Mohammed, Ismail Khan, they are out of the country. Why should the Taliban worry about being nice? I mean, this is obviously not what I think, but let's imagine from a purely realistic point of view, they are rather fundamentalist, that they are not famous for power sharing. Do you think that the opposition is going to have any chance to force them to change their behavior?
First of all, the arrogance of the Taliban coming from this military victory is very apparent. The way they have created the cabinet, all male, almost all Pashtuns, all mullahs and Maulawis, it shows that there is no room for the Taliban to accommodate the diversity of political views inside Afghanistan. So in that terms, as you said, they don't see the need to be nice. So they said that they have coerced the world. They have defeated, quote unquote, a superpower in Afghanistan. And then the rest is the easy walk. It means the world has to appease to the Taliban through various forms of diplomacy, deliberation, and cooperation. And that is what the Taliban mentality looks like, at least for now. But in terms of opposition, yes, Taliban have won a battle, but the fight isn't over. I mean, the fight isn't just a military fight. The political, the social, the civil defiance against the Taliban, the human resistance against the Taliban is very much at the core of the whole resistance against the Taliban. I think as we move forward and the Taliban put more pressures on communities, do more sort of dictatorial, authoritarian push against dissents and against voices of opposition, the more we will see the voices and the communities reorganizing around a common cause of defiance and resisting the Taliban. Yes, there has been the resistance in Panjshir against the Taliban. Taliban are now somehow the most organized criminal group in Afghanistan. I'm not sure if that military confrontation against the opposition proves anything in short term or result in anything in the short term. But in the long run, as Taliban will make more mistakes, the politics of the region, the politics of the world would allow at least options for supporting the resistance, which is, I'm not too optimistic, but there is the opportunity to see the opposition growing in the coming months and years.
Thank you so much, Mr. Forugh. Let's go now with Mr. Khan. I have one question from Mr. Khan, which is, well, I have many questions for him, but I think that we can start with one, which is when the Taliban took over Afghanistan, when they took over Kabul, Pakistan Prime Minister Imran Khan, he said that Afghans had broken the shackles of slavery. What did he mean, and does this mean a support to the Taliban from Pakistan, let's say an open support?
I think this particular remark has been overly emphasized by the outsiders. Basically, what he was saying was that the foreign forces have left. There's nothing more to it. Now, it is for the Afghans to really address their problems. So this is what he had meant. He has said so many things. He's a politician. When the politicians are there before the mic, they say all kinds of things. So this is one of those remarks about which I can only say, if I have to give a positive spin to it, that what he meant was that there are no more foreign forces in Afghanistan. But there is one thing that I may like to say over here, that as a neighbor, which is very much affected by the situation in Afghanistan, for us now, two things are very important. One is that there is no return to civil war. The conflict doesn't return to that country. And the second thing is that humanitarian crisis, which is staring in our face, that is averted. These two things are of primary concern to us, apart from so many other things. There are so many challenges that Afghanistan faces, the Taliban face, other leaders of Afghanistan face, and I think Mr. Tavish has already mentioned those, but these two. Now, for these two objectives, to pursue these objectives, there is a need to engage also the Taliban, even if we don't like their polity, even if they are making mistakes, but they will have to be engaged if these two objectives are to be pursued. So I'll just add that to it.
I mean, about this precisely, I would like to ask you more specifically about Pakistan. What's the role that Pakistan has played in the Taliban? I mean, in the 90s, some Pakistani generals like Nasirullah Babar, they were very open in their support of the Taliban. The Taliban, they come from Pakistan. It's like, let's say 70 or 80% of the US casualties took place fundamentally in border areas. And the leadership of the Taliban was in Pakistan, the Quetta Shura. So what's the actual role played by Pakistan in the Taliban?
I think if you look at the ground realities of Pakistan and Afghanistan, then it would be easier to understand. For example, all the Mujahideen leaders who are now part of the older Afghan government, they were in Pakistan. The 8 Tanzimat leaders, they were in Pakistan. And the Soviet Union used to call them Basmachis. Basmachi means dacoits or criminals, right? And Pakistan was being accused of hosting them. So it's a complex sort of situation, because there is a population overlap between Afghanistan and Pakistan. Whenever there is a problem in Afghanistan, the refugees pour into Pakistan. Earlier in the 80s, 3 million refugees came into Pakistan. Then even from 2018, 2020 onwards, we have received over 1 million refugees. Now, this is not a small number. If you want to know which is, for example, the largest Pashtun city in the world, it is not Kabul, it is not Peshawar, it is Karachi. And there are, half of them are Afghans. So it's a complex situation that has to be understood. Secondly, to say that the Taliban were a creation of Pakistan, I can go into the facts, the way they came up in Kandahar area and via Kandahar area and all that. Afterwards, of course, when they were on the roll, Pakistan did support them. But they certainly were not a creation of Pakistan. The other point that I would like to make, and I think any Afghan would bear me out, Afghans, true to their character, they do not listen to others. And least of all, they listen to Pakistan. So that is a fact of life. But we are their neighbor, we put up with them, whatever, and we hope for the best. There is one other last factor that I would like to mention here is that in Afghanistan, the largest population segment is of Pashtuns, which is undeniable, largest segment, population segment. And in Pakistan, we have 3 times as many Pashtuns as there are in Afghanistan. So it's a very complex situation, and sometimes people want to simplify it and say that Pakistan, Taliban are creation of Pakistan, and Taliban have been supported, and that is why they have been able to overwhelm Afghanistan. This is incredible. So this is what I'll say.
Precisely about this this last point that you have made, which I think is very interesting and oftentimes overlooked in at least in the West. I'd like to ask you the last question of this slot, which is, what are the implications of a Taliban-led Afghanistan for Pakistan? Do you think that there is a risk of Pashtuns overturning the Durand line or questioning it? Pakistani politics becoming more religious, perhaps a Pashtun revival also in internal politics in Pakistan. Do you think it's going to have any implication in your country's internal politics, since, as you mentioned, Afghanistan and Pakistan share many things?
Yes, there has already been consequences for Pakistan of this 40 years of war. Pakistan has been affected by what we call Kalashnikov culture. So we have already suffered. There has been terrorism in Pakistan, and people do not know that we have suffered more than 70,000 casualties in Pakistan, both civilian and military about 5,000, more than all the losses that we have in our wars with India. So it was a heavy price that we have paid. We missed out on globalization. We have economically suffered. So there has already been. Secondly, you mentioned about religious. Yes, there has been an impact on Pakistan, and some of these extremist forces, they can get encouraged by what has happened in Afghanistan. But I think we have already been through this phase of the religious rise, extremist rise, terrorism, rise of terrorism. And somehow or the other, we have been able to cope with it. And I hope that we will be able to do that, because there is now a much greater consciousness within the society that this is the greatest threat that we face in Pakistan. So hopefully the advent of the Taliban is not going to make that impact. One other point that I would like to make is that Taliban have slightly changed over these 20 years, and their behavior was a bit different than their behavior in the 1990s. Similarly, the Taliban will have to change if they have to govern Afghanistan, or if they have to be part of governance in Afghanistan. They will have to change. You know, this so-called government, which they say caretaker government, this is certainly, it doesn't help them, or it is not acceptable to anybody. They are the old guard hardliners. And this will be temporary in my view.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And well, let's go now to our third panelist, General Sharma. The first question I would like to ask you is, in the 90s, India was rather active, as far as I know, correct me on this, supporting the anti-Taliban opposition of Sharma. Now Delhi seems to be more accommodating towards the Taliban. It seems highly improbable that it will recognize the regime, but I mean, certainly it has a much more open attitude. Could you comment a little bit on why do you think this change of attitude? Is it because the Taliban have changed, as some people say? Is it because India wants to have some counterpart to talk with in Afghanistan, even if it is a regime that is not particularly enthusiastic about, or if there are other implications?
See, I would respond by saying that India's position on Afghanistan has been consistent, and it is steeped in 4 core foreign policy tenets. First is we are against a zero-sum game, and we genuinely believed in a peace-building process which is Afghan-owned, led, and controlled. Second thing, India would not be a party to or agree to any radical ideology which is alien to Afghan nationalism taking root there. Third is we genuinely believe Afghans' potential to be harnessed as a bridge between Central Asia, West Asia, and South Asia. And we have done and we would continue to do a huge capacity building work there. Now, earlier, when India had joined hands with Iran, Russia, Tajikistan for supporting Northern Alliance, Northern Alliance was a genuine uprising against the tyrannical rule of Taliban. Americans had lost interest and Afghanistan was in total chaos, and therefore the only island of stability there would have been Northern Alliance, and that is how India put its shoulder to the wheel. Now the geopolitical situation has undergone a paradigm shift there, because the very forces which were supporting Northern Alliance have actually joined hands, at least temporarily, with Taliban. And therefore, India stands to be somewhat isolated. And Americans have lost interest. They lost interest then and they've lost interest now. So therefore, what is India looking forward to? India has certain conditions which need to be fulfilled. One is that inclusivity factor. Second is the respect for human rights. And third is that soil of Afghanistan should not be used against any other country, particularly India. If these conditions are fulfilled and Taliban are able to reconcile with the ground reality, based on the tangible results that Taliban regime shows, India would recalibrate its strategy. And today we are in talks, we are doing a lot of work at the UN and we are talking with other like-minded countries. And it's a matter of time that India would probably be more open and more specific in regard to its new Afghan policy.
Thank you. And precisely, you have mentioned the terrorist issue. The last time that the Taliban were in power, it rather actively supported the Kashmiri insurgency, or at least allowed considerable activity of disparate groups going through Afghanistan to train and to go to Kashmir. And it was particularly visible during the big crisis of December 1999 with the India Airways plane that was hijacked and diverted to Kandahar. What does India expect this time around? If it can expect anything, because I think it's clear to me that, it's like no one knows exactly what's going to happen.
See, again, I would say the conditions at that point in time were very different than the conditions as they exist now. That point in time, most of these mujahideen and the foreign terrorists were out of work, and Pakistan wanted to channelize them in some direction. The second factor was Pakistan was very euphoric about a victory that they had attained against Soviet Union. And they thought it's very easy for them to replicate that model in Kashmir. And third, the public sentiment, those were the initial years of proxy war in Kashmir. So even the public sentiment, the ground was very, very fertile for these people to come. And India was also new to this kind of a cross-border terrorism and asymmetric warfare. So therefore, they had a limited success, but in due course of time, we were able to very effectively control the situation. Now, India has a very robust counter-infiltration and counter-terrorism posture. Post abrogation of Article 370, there is a new socio-political paradigm which is in Kashmir. As also Pakistan would have its own compulsions in regard to FATF and its accountability to international community, and it being actually the first casualty in cross-border terrorism. They've lost about 70,000 plus people, even after 2001. So I would say, yes, there would be a little spurt. There would be attempts made by forces that are inimical to India's security, but India is more than prepared to cope up with that situation. We've been able to control a lot of dynamics in Valley, though there is a degree of alienation and maybe some kind of a radicalization which persists. We are very effective in terms of our kinetic capabilities, but a lot of non-kinetic capabilities are to be built up. But in some, I would say that I will not, nor will any Indian take a very alarmist view, but we will be ready for any spillover effect if that manifests on across our borders.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you to the three of you for your answers. I think it's really great because I mean it's like you are talking and again I mean just like we are getting a real vision from the ground. So I would like to ask you several questions to the three of you. So if possible, limit your answers to like around 1 minute or something like that, because then we would like to open the floor to our audience. Many of the questions about Afghanistan are about security. This is the first and paramount issue regarding that country for the rest of the world. Unfortunately for the Afghans, to an extent, because obviously it doesn't focus on them very much as a people with obvious needs. But talking about this, I mean, and talking precisely about the Kalashnikov culture. Now, when we talk about the Taliban, I mean, in the past it was the Taliban, then it was the Taliban and Al-Qaeda and Kashmiri militant groups. Now is the Taliban and Islamic State. What views do you have about the presence of the Islamic State in Afghanistan and the ability and willingness of the Taliban to fight them as the US Biden administration is betting on? Mr. Forugh?
First of all, Taliban have created this ecosystem, this nexus of terror in the region that is capable of accommodating various forms of terrorism that is pursuing different aims at different parts of the world. For example, with Al-Qaeda, the Taliban's relationship is not just of convenience or friendship, but rather goes deep with the family bonds. It's a sort of material reciprocity and Islamic camaraderie that is there. So even with the push from the United States against the Taliban and requesting the Taliban to cut ties with Al-Qaeda, the fact is that they are very much intertwined, at least in the ideological front, first of all, and then second, at the tactical front against their enemies. There has been reports of the movements of Al-Qaeda, the resurgence of Al-Qaeda, and the reorganization of the rest of the terrorist networks. Taliban seem to be very effective in fighting back against the Afghan government and coalition forces as a guerrilla and insurgent force, right? But as a force to govern Afghanistan, Afghanistan is too vast and too complex for the Taliban to assert control all over the country. Re-emergence what I predict, what I see is the Taliban will be ineffective in controlling Afghanistan. The re-emergence of the ISIS, of the Caliphate of the ISIS, under any name, perhaps under the Khilafat of Khorasan or whatever name, that is a possibility. And second, the Taliban the way they are conducting themselves in terms of a political force vis-a-vis the people of Afghanistan, there is the possibility of a huge uprising against the Taliban that also challenge the territorial sort of control of the Taliban in the long run. So, and then the situation and the relationship between the Taliban and the other Islamist forces will encourage them to seek refuge, to use from the infrastructure that is there from the jihad era, the ecosystem that was created by the CIA, funded by the Saudis, and facilitated in part by the ISI. So that ecosystem, plus other elements of domestic elements in Afghanistan, with the international groups, that is capable of producing any other terror network under any banner with different names, with different colors. And that is going to challenge the political and peaceful order of the region and beyond.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your answer. Mr. Kang, what's your view about this question?
I have just a brief comment on two things. One is this question of Taliban. Mr. Brahimi, who at one time was the special representative of the United Nations Secretary General on Afghanistan, he spoke about what he said, original sin. What was the original sin? In 2002, early 2002, January, all these Taliban leaders, etc., they were prepared to surrender, many of them. They were reconcilable. We told President Bush, Mr. Musharraf had done that, others, that please, those who are reconcilable, bring them into the fold. But the Taliban were lumped together with Al-Qaeda, whereas Taliban were part of the political landscape of Afghanistan. Nobody can deny that. We talk about, CIA did this and the Saudis did that. Saudis did whatever they did, or CIA did whatever they did for the Mujahideen leaders. Mujahideen leaders included Karzai Sahab also. Mujahideen leaders included Mr. Mujaddidi, Mr. Sayyaf, all others. So they were in Kabul ruling after Mr. Najibullah. So let's not forget about history. So the problem would have been sorted out if these people, many of these leaders, Taliban leaders, they were brought into the fold, either of the Bonn process, or if not Bonn process, at least they would have been accepted as part of the society without and allowed them to lay down their arms. The second thing is Sharma Sahib had raised about Kashmir. I don't want to discuss Kashmir over here, but let me say one thing, that you asked now Mehbooba Mufti or Farooq Abdullah, who had been supporters of India. You ask them what has happened after 5th of August 1990. Why are they so upset? So, and why do you have to keep such a large force in that small valley? So, to put all the blame on Pakistan and not to see what is the problem, then you would never be able to resolve that problem. So we had efforts, the 4-point during Manmohan Singh Sahab and Musharraf. Unfortunately, that did not fly, but anyway, those kinds of approaches were very welcome. So what I would say is that the problems always have a history. We have to look into that history in order to understand them. And even today, we have to see that the Taliban are product of their environment in which they had lived and they had grown up. So to expect from them something quite different that the world is expecting is a little too much. I think they have changed to a certain extent. Hopefully they will change further. But certainly the way they have gone for this government, they call it interim or caretaker, is not something which gives confidence that they will be able to govern, but they will have to change if they want to govern Afghanistan. I fully agree with Tavish Saab that Afghanistan is a complex country. It's a difficult country to govern, and everybody will have to cooperate, including the Taliban, for that purpose. Thank you.
And what are your views regarding specifically the Islamic State, which is like the obsession here in Washington?
Yes, Islamic State is not just the problem of Afghanistan. Islamic State is our problem. Islamic State is international problem, because these people are, they also have a long history of almost 1,300 years. So they go to the Khawarij. Anyway, one doesn't have to go into that. These people are extremists to the core. They put no value to the life of other people, completely intolerant. So they will have to be dealt with strong hand. Or if they change, fine. One of our greatest concern is that the Afghan territory may be used against Pakistan's interests. And when we say about Pakistan's against Pakistan's interests, in that ISIS comes, in that TTP, which is Tehreek Taliban Pakistan, that is included. And we had rather negative experience in the past about that. So this is something we hope that under the Taliban or under whatever political dispensation emerges at the end, this problem will also be taken care of in a wholesome manner.
Thank you very much. And General Sharma, what's your view about the risk of a resurgence of the Islamic State in Afghanistan, where it already has some presence?
See, before I come to that question, a very quick response to what the Foreign Secretary, the former Foreign Secretary, has said about Kashmir. He's a very respectable diplomat, and I respect his views. All I want to say that dissent is part of our democratic process. And there are not only in state of Jammu and Kashmir, many other states, there are dissenting voices. The mother of all the problems is counterterrorism. And if Pakistan and India can join hands and look at as a common problem, I'm sure the other problems can easily be resolved. But the kind of rhetoric and utterances that we hear from the top leadership of Pakistan against even our democratically elected leaders, I think that doesn't augur well for any way forward. This is a discussion that we can sort of have all together on a different occasion. Now, in regard to specific question about Daesh, I would totally agree with what Tavish said, that it is part of a overall ecosystem that has been created. And I would say, you look at what forms constitute the core of Daesh. It is basically 70% of these people are Urkazai and Afridi tribesmen from the northwestern province of Pakistan. Second issue that I want to say, well, there would be a sprinkling of people who came from Syria and Iraq. Second thing is, where is it located? It is located just opposite Peshawar in the area of Nangarhar and Kunar provinces. Who is giving them support there? Third thing is, it is documented that they have a very close relationship with the Haqqani network. And there are opinions that many people think that it's a veritable arm of ISI. It is just a countervailing force. Should Taliban at some stage become more nationalistic and start getting out of control of Pakistan's ISI, this is another countervailing force which can be used. Though there would be layers of deniability to this effect, and when we can discuss that. But what I would expect that Daesh actually may not have the wherewithal to take on Taliban or part of it in one-to-one battle. These people have a great capacity for acellular attack, small cells, and they can go for the sectarian attack. and also target aid workers and other soft targets in the urban centers. And let's see how Taliban is able to cope up with this. We will have to see, but it's a very big problem that we'll all have to live with.
Thank you very much. Well, I mean, we have many more questions for all of you. I mean, some of them you have mentioned them in passing. I mean, there's obviously Sirajuddin Haqqani is a big element of worry, and also you have briefly spoken about other countries in the region, particularly Russia, Iran, but also Tajikistan. What's the role? Turkey, Qatar, obviously. But I think it's about time to open the floor to the public, to our audience. They've been asking questions all the time, and I'm going to ask you a few questions. I think basically any of you can answer, or the three of you can answer to each question. Some of them are basically based on Afghanistan, other get more the whole regional picture. So, I mean, the first question is like, it's very basic but very true. It's like, why should Taliban bother about recognition from other countries? I mean, after all, in the 90s, they ruled Afghanistan, or most part of Afghanistan, with the recognition of only 3 countries: Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and the Emirates. This is a question for Air Marshal Tiwari. So what do you think about this? Can the Taliban go along just without any kind of recognition, international recognition? I think the first person to answer should be Mr. Forugh, because it's obviously his country.
There's a very interesting situation, right? The situation looks like an after party. America's gone. There is no more international forces. So the adversaries of America in the region, including Iran, Russia, China, and to some extent, of course, Pakistan, is happily joining the party and celebrating with the Taliban. But the fact is that all of these countries, at least at the core of their strategist circles, they know the composition of the Taliban, the design of the Taliban, and the regional expansionist ambitions of groups, for example, like Haqqani within the Taliban. I agree with former Foreign Secretary on the fact that the Taliban has this indigenous nationalist elements within themselves. These circles could be part of the Taliban's leadership, part of the Taliban's caretaker government, or any sort of political dispensations that will be in place in Kabul in the next few months, for example. But the fact is that, for example, Haqqani and the rest of the support that Haqqani networks bring to the Taliban as the military powerful wing of this group has other ambitions in the region. They have their own sort of connections and networks with the rest of the intelligence communities in the neighborhood. It is imperative for the Taliban that to consider the interest of not just a particular neighbor that provided sanctuary and support and whatever sort of political means for them, but of course to the countries surrounding Afghanistan. For instance, Russians and Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan may have their own sort of interest that needs to be addressed by the Taliban. And I believe that the way the Taliban have conducted themselves in the last few weeks, that's very short of the expectations. For instance, the blockade on Panjshir, the claims of ethnic cleansing in Daikundi, the indiscriminate brutality and the culture of terror that's imposed on the communities of Tajiks in the northern parts of the country. It shows that the Taliban are incapable, first, governing and preparing themselves to govern a complex society, a transformed society. Second, they will face the same level of deficiency and shortcoming when dealing with balancing the interests of the regional players. Of course, there is now the support of the diplomatic support of Pakistan, plus Qataris, plus a number of the Iranian politicians, that the diplomacy support is there. They are mentoring the Taliban, preparing them to conduct themselves better. And of course, there is a tendency within Washington, including the Biden administration's officials, that look, the Taliban is now the dominant force. Let's make sure that we're engaged with them. But as we move forward, there is real possibility of clash and contradiction and confronting with the interest of the regional players. Of course, it needs more sort of cohesive approach from the Taliban, which they are incapable of demonstrating.
Thank you. Former Secretary Mr. Khan, what do you have to say? I mean, do you think that international recognition is really critical for the Taliban?
Well, I think it's very important for the Taliban to have international recognition, and they have been asking for it. But certainly they have to also be sensitive to the concerns of the international community if they want to have that kind of recognition. It's a question which we will see how it develops in the next couple of months, I should say, because nobody seems to be in a hurry to recognize the Taliban government at this stage. At this stage, as I had said earlier, there are two urgent priorities. One is to see how a civil war can be prevented in Afghanistan, because if a civil war takes place, it would be a disaster, another 20 years. Secondly, the humanitarian crisis. And when we talk about humanitarian crisis, it should be regardless of who is sitting in Kabul, it should be for the people of Afghanistan. So that has to be, and there I think the world community has to join hands in order to see to it that the suffering of the Afghan people is not further aggravated. So the question of recognition in that context become a bit secondary.
General Sherman, what's your view about this?
Yeah, you see, I would go by that the sheer power of gun and ideology cannot dispense the needs of or meet the needs of people of Afghanistan. Today, there is a huge humanitarian crisis which is staring us in the face. And then there is an economic collapse which is imminent. Now, what is the magnitude of the humanitarian crisis? As per the UN report, 1 million children are facing death due to starvation. 93% people are already on the verge of facing hunger. Right. Look at the aid that they require. Just to sustain themselves, they require $10 billion for several years. From where that money is going to come? Then the donors group has pledged about $1.1 billion to them. If they become a pariah, internationally pariah actor, will somebody send that money to them? How that money is going to be funneled and reach the grassroots level? Therefore, it is but a Hobson's choice for Taliban to reconcile to this reality. And if they do not change, then the only humanitarian disaster and a civil war is imminent in Afghanistan.
Thank you very much.
Can I add just one thing? The assets that the Afghans have and which have been frozen by United States because of various reasons, the human rights question and all that, I think we have to rethink about it. This is Afghan money, and it should be spent on the Afghan people to avert this kind of crisis, humanitarian crisis. I mean, for the right of women to be educated and all that, they are good and they have to be supported. But you can't deny them the right to live by denying them the resource which can sustain them. So that, I think, the international community should look into it, and that should be released for the purpose of helping the Afghan people, providing them with humanitarian assistance.
Since I am the moderator, I have the chance to control the agenda and to twist a little bit the questions. So there's another question from Air Marshal Tiwari as well, which is precisely about the humanitarian crisis, the fact that the United States was paying for 80% of Afghanistan's budget, as he states in his question. He wonders what's going to happen when it's very clear that this money is not coming. But I would like to ask you, the three of you, is like, couldn't the Taliban do something just for the sake of appearances? Like, for instance, saying that Osama bin Laden was involved in 9/11, which is something that the Taliban spokesperson explicitly denied to NBC, the US TV station, I think on August 24th, I don't remember exactly the day. I mean, why is so difficult for them, even for the sake of diplomacy, for getting these $9 billion that are frozen in the United States and by the Bank of International Settlements, to make these concessions, to put 2 token women in the cabinet, to not having a cabinet that is 47 people and 44 of them are Pashtun. Do you have an idea why it's so complicated for the Taliban to play this card that could make things significantly easier for them? You can start, Mr. Khan, if you want.
Oh, with me?
Well, any one of you. I mean, it's like, I would like to know your views about this. It's like this seemingly rigidity of the Taliban to make clear concessions, just for the sake of the gallery.
You know, about the particular specific question that you have raised, we all say that Osama bin Laden was responsible for the attack on the Twin Towers. But there is one thing, and I did a lot of research on this when I was writing my second book. And I was with the Woodrow Wilson Center at that time in 2009. To find one clear statement by Osama bin Laden saying that he was responsible, or he ordered, or he takes responsibility for the attacks, I could not find. And I had 2 interns, I had asked them that they should find, could not find, except, one very vague reference that when he had seen the towers in Beirut falling, he had thought about this. So the thing is that the Taliban at that time, because Pakistan had tried very hard that they should hand over Osama bin Laden to either Saudi Arabia or to the Americans. And they were always saying that there should be a trial, and the trial should determine whether he's responsible, and then they can do that. So probably it's a throwback to those times that they are making these kinds of statements. They are undiplomatic, but they have their own outlook on these matters.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Forugh, do you want to add something to this question?
Yes, I think Taliban did good with fighting, right? But the weight of governing and the responsibilities of a government responsible to the public, that is quite another thing. And that is where the Taliban's rudimentary sort of stretched too thin government comes into the play. In terms of why they are so rigid, it's very much rooted in the way they see the world, in the way they conduct themselves, and in the way they see that, okay, there is no need to do so, because if you are tough enough, if you can coerce the world, then they're going to appease you. That is what happened, at least for the last 20 years. I remember, and I'm sure Foreign Secretary remembers, and General Sharma too, that the world begged the Taliban to not destroy Buddha statues in Bamyan. The Buddhist community sends letter, the UNESCO, the UN, and they even said that we're going to provide humanitarian supports in exchange of not destroying the Buddha statues. But then they destroyed it. I mean, the culture of destruction, this mentality that if you can coerce, if you can destroy, you can force your adversaries and your enemies and in the international community and the world system appeasing to you, is very dominant and prevailing in Taliban's thinking. That is why I believe that while there is this sanity, this rationale in providing humanitarian support to the people of Afghanistan, which suffer the most from the whole forms of crises, there should be a balance between what we expect the Taliban while giving them the money to serve the people. The international humanitarian agencies can make sure that while supporting the Taliban, the money is not in the hands of the Taliban. Yes, they have tried to form this governing structure to present it as a caretaker government, but that's not legally internationally recognized. First of all, there is no legitimacy for that governing entity from the people of Afghanistan. Therefore, any sort of aid support, any humanitarian campaign should be very much focused, strict, and make sure that the food and supply are delivering to the hands of the ordinary Afghans, while avoiding the Taliban to use this as a milking source, as a source of income, and as a source of consolidating a totalitarian rule while taking hostage the people of Afghanistan under the pretext of severe humanitarian crisis, which is real, by the way. It's not fake, it's real. The hunger is real, the economic collapse is real, the people's need for food is real. But there is also other needs of the people. The needs to express themselves, the need to talk, the need to live without fear, without insult, without wiping, without being threatened by the Taliban soldiers in the streets. That is also another reality, which is very much linked to the dignity of the humans of Afghanistan, equal to the food and to the other supplies that needs the bodily sort of needs of the people.
Thank you so much. General Sharma, your turn.
Yes. I would respond by saying that Osama bin Laden is a martyr in the eyes of Taliban rank and file. And they were the ones who helped him in escape from Tora Bora. And subsequently, it was their mentors on the other side who housed him in Abbottabad. Therefore, even to the extent of Imran Khan has called him a martyr in his statement, he called him Shaheed. And very recently, when Tolo News reporter was interviewing Shah Mohammed Qureshi, he tried his level best to make him say that, well, he was a terrorist he never committed. I don't think Taliban are going to accept that. And those elements within Taliban like Mullah Brother and Tankazai, who would have probably taken that kind of a stand, have been totally sidelined. Even if hypothetically Taliban accept him as a terrorist, I don't think that is going to appease Americans at this juncture. What Americans would be looking at is certain more tangible and sustainable results on ground than to make these optical kind of adjustments.
Thank you. We have one question from Roberta Campani, which is, from my point of view, is very good because it's very simple. Oftentimes the simple questions are the most difficult ones to answer. Just what have the Taliban explicitly said about their objectives and ultimate goals? What kind of state do the Taliban want to create? Because we don't really know. I mean, it's a Sharia-inspired state, but what does it mean? We can start with you, General Sharma, since you are already on the screen, and then go to the other panelists.
See, they have been very categorical that they want to create an Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. That means they basically want to impose Nizam-e-Mustafa or Sharia, but it not necessarily mean a caliphate, because there is a difference. Now, Prime Minister Okhun gave a statement very recently, just 2 days back, that we are ready to accept all international agreements and international accords as long as they are not in contradiction to Islamic law. Now, this leaves a lot of interpretation. Maybe there is a little bit of a reconciliation within Taliban, how to coexist, how a theocratic state coexists in a Westphalian international system. That realization is there, but they also run the risk. If they push this envelope too much forward, it may antagonize some of their hardcore elements, and they would be inside in fighting within them. How they are able to convince their cadres, it's only a matter of time. But at this juncture, I think they are not looking for a typical caliphate, which is not sustainable.
Thank you very much. Former Secretary Kong, your turn.
My turn. Well, I think it's right that they basically want the Islamic emirate, and they want to impose the Sharia law. This is, they think, is their duty, sacred duty. But you see, in Islam, there are so many interpretations of what is Sharia itself. In Pakistan, for example, we have one simple law that nothing, no law, no rules can be against the Islamic law, against the Quran. And we say that that's why we are an Islamic State, Republic. So in that, you know, our legal system, which is basically based on the Western system, that also finds a certain legitimacy. Our political system, which has a parliament, which has a senate, all of those things, that also finds a certain legitimacy, because we say this is consistent with the Islamic laws. So this, like any religion, I would say, basically it depends on interpretation. Who is interpreting? Now, if for example, the Afghans, they have a commission to see what kind of constitution they should have so that it becomes Islamic, that probably will sort out many things. So this is all that I can say.
And thank you very much, Mr. Forugh.
The pragmatist faction and the pragmatist elements within the Taliban, or the minority within the Taliban, there are, of course, people within the Taliban that thinks that they cannot lead and govern Afghanistan in isolation, but that's not a prevailing dominant narrative within the Taliban. They feel that a theocratic regime based on their read of Quran, on their narrative of the Sharia, is going to lead Afghanistan to happiness and to sa'adat, right? That is the dominant force. In practical terms, that means the Taliban will have problem accommodating the voice of the women, the rights of the women, the rights of the children, their nature of being anti-art, anti-education, anti-modern secular education. That is giving a clue what sort of a government the Taliban are aiming to form. I mean, the caretaker government could be an example. There is no other sort of strong evidence to present than what Taliban already presented to the world. That is, if we can borrow this term, that is a mullahcracy, a government of mullahs, by the mullahs, for the mullahs. The people voices, the public authority, the sort of contract between citizen and the state is absent, because the authority comes from divine, and then the Taliban Amir or the supreme leader is the one who manages A to the Z of the public affairs and the public domain. So whatever sort of rights derived from that interpretation of Islam and Quran is going to be the government of the Taliban. And unfortunately, with the theocratic regimes, for example, like Iran in the neighborhood, that is quite a textbook example of how to form and how to consolidate and how to expand a regime that is very much Islamic, based on on a very specific interpretation of Islam. I agree with former secretary that even within the Islam, even within Afghanistan, we had this traditional Khurasani, Iranian, Persian understanding of Islam. And even in Pakistan, that is the case. Or in India, that form of interpretation of Islam exists. So I'm sure that there will be no sort of separation between the public sphere and in the Taliban sphere of governing. So the future, with all the different sort of nuances that we're going to have about the Taliban, it seems so bleak, because whatever ideology that you have there for governing is not reflecting the modern sort of transformed Afghan society realities. And it's going to be problematic, not for the Taliban, but for the region and for the world, in terms of dealing and engaging with a government that sees themselves as this beacon of hope for the Islamists, for the jihadists, and at the same time defeating, quote unquote, two superpowers in the last 40 years. This is what's going to happen.
Thank you. I'm going to merge two questions. One is from Roberta Campani again, and the other one is from Joseph Smith. Basically, Afghanistan is a landlocked country. Unfortunately, it's a poor country that has been ravaged by for 40 years of war. So where do the Taliban get their support? Is it internal, external? If it is external, where does it come from? And second, why can't regional powers hold the Taliban accountable? It's a matter of not being able or not being willing to. We can start with you, Mr. Forugh.
I mean, as previously explained by General Sharma, there is a sort of this wait and see. And as former secretary said, there is no hurry in recognizing the Taliban as a legitimate government of Afghanistan. So everyone is seeing how the Taliban will conduct themselves, how they will interact with the issues of women's rights, human rights, and the citizenry rights of the Afghan people. I think in terms of the regional players, there has been a sort of indifference and reluctance as the United States was engaged, and everyone thought that there will be no sort of chaotic, dramatic withdrawal as it happened, and that was very chaotic in different terms, because the vacuum that was created is not. I mean, the regional players are not capable of filling that vacuum, because that is too large, too expensive, and too costly for any regional player to step up and engage that immediately. But of course, as we move forward, there will be new alliances. The players' interests will pivot and will have more sort of regional alliances shaped. And that is where the Taliban's real test of governing Afghanistan will be conducted.
Former Secretary Ken?
Sorry, I couldn't hear.
Oh, you can hear my question, I guess, right?
Yeah.
My question is why is it so difficult for the regional powers to reign on the Taliban? It's a matter of willpower, or it's a matter of that it's impossible to do?
I think the experience of outside powers in Afghanistan has been somewhat difficult. And any regional power who would like to mess around over there, even with good intentions, may not be able to come out with a happy experience. So the thing is that you had mentioned, I think that it's a landlocked country. We are trying, and we had tried earlier also, that we should offer whatever facilitation that we can to Afghanistan for their trade and for any other matters. Even, for example, we do provide access to Afghanistan through Karachi to India for their trade. But there is a problem about the transit, which we only provide to the Afghans, not to India, because that is governed by bilateral agreements, and we don't have any bilateral agreement with India on this score. So we try to do whatever we can, and there are certain things which are not within our own capacity. The natural tendency of most of the Afghans is, especially those who live in South and Southeast, that whenever there is problem in Afghanistan, they tend to move into Pakistan. Already thousands of refugees have come into Pakistan after this change. We are hoping that we will be able to prevent that by allowing humanitarian assistance inside Afghanistan. So as far as political issues are concerned, I think it is the Afghans who can decide matters. The outsiders can put some pressure that they should not again go into a conflict. But it is primarily the Afghans, which includes Taliban, which includes Mr. Karzai, Mr. Abdullah, and the international community together, not one country, not Pakistan, not China, not Russia, but together, they should be in a position to put some pressure on Afghans, Taliban, whoever is there in Kabul, that they should try to prevent war, and they should be more sensitive to what the international community is wanting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Khan. And General Sharma, your turn.
I would say that right from 1974 onwards till today, Afghanistan has been the arena of the Great Power contestation. And in that, the regional countries have aligned and realigned their positions. Earlier, it was the Cold War era, and that is how Americans used Afghans to sort of get out, to put the Soviets out of Afghanistan. Subsequently, the whole ball game changed. And now all the regional countries, Russia, Iran, China, they joined hands to see the American exit from Afghanistan. Likewise, Pakistan's Afghan policy has been India-centric. They somehow see that, well, India is part of the grand encirclement design, and they wanted to marginalize Indian influence there. And that is how Taliban was supported. All the safe haven, the entire ecosystem existed in Pakistan. That is from where Taliban drew their sustenance. Likewise, Taliban were also helped to a certain extent by Iranians, right? Russians were helping them. Now the whole ball game has undergone a change. I think a good realization should dawn upon the regional countries, and they should put their heads together and put an end to this game and give some semblance of peace and stability to Afghan people, for which we need to work out a regional framework of the countries, and in which we should forget about our traditional differences and look at things from a very fresh perspective to bring about peace and stability in the region.
Thank you very much. Well, we've run over our allotted time. It was a really fantastic panel. I hope our audience has learned from you. I personally learned a lot. I would like you to have some closing remarks, but unfortunately, Atul is telling me that, again, that we ran out of time, that it was too long. There are many more questions, some of them very specific about political arrangements in Afghanistan that could be absolutely great. But I would like to thank you, the three of you. I'm really, really grateful to you for your participation, for the discussion, for all the views that you have given to us, particularly to a real foreign audience that is not familiar with all the regional dynamics. Let's hope that the situation improves, because beyond geopolitics and beyond everything, there are 38, 39 million Afghans whose future is terribly uncertain and who face poverty and face probably civil strife. They have suffered incredibly through the last 40 years. They suffered in this last chapter of the war. I always find very irritating when some people here in Washington, D.C. says that the Afghans didn't want to fight. They put 200,000 dead bodies on the table in this last civil war. Well, thank you very much to all of you. Don't forget to sign up for the Fair Observer newsletter. You can also follow it in social media, on Twitter, My Fair Observer. And hopefully we'll have another conversation, another talk about Afghanistan. And let's hope that it will be in a more favorable and optimistic situation, perhaps discussing how to rebuild and how to continue a process of national reconciliation and stabilization. But thank you to the three of you, Mr. Forugh, former Secretary Khan, and General Sharma. And again, thank you very much for your time and for your views. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.